My fiancée threw my engagement ring straight at my face after her childhood best friend came back into her life. She looked me in the eye and said, "We connect so deeply, your pathetic mind could never understand." Looking back now, it's almost impossible to believe that the same woman is begging me to take her back after karma completely turned her life upside down. But that's getting ahead of the story. So grab a seat because this was one wild ride. I'm a 36-year-old aerospace engineer, and I spent 6 months working overtime just to buy that ring. I stayed late at the plant, picked up weekend shifts, skipped lunches, and saved every extra dollar I could. It wasn't flashy, just a beautiful 2-carat diamond on a white gold band that cost me $8,000. When I proposed, Lauren, my 34-year-old fiancée, cried happy tears. We had been together for almost 4 years, lived together for 2, shared bills, split rent, and even had a joint savings account. We weren't wealthy, but we had a stable life and real plans for the future. I designed ventilation systems for military aircraft, and while the job wasn't glamorous, it paid well enough for us to build a comfortable life. Wedding planning took 8 months, and everything seemed to be falling into place. My family loved her, my friends approved, and there were no obvious warning signs. Then came the rehearsal dinner on Friday night, with the wedding set for 3 o'clock the next afternoon. Around 40 friends and family gathered in the church basement, and after most people had left, it was just Lauren, the wedding coordinator, and me going over the final details. Without any warning, Lauren interrupted the coordinator and said, "I can't do this. I can't marry you, Jude." The room went silent. I stared at her, completely confused, and reminded her that our wedding was the next day and everyone had already traveled to be there. She didn't hesitate. She told me she couldn't go through with it because she didn't love me and never really had. Before I could even process those words, she ripped the engagement ring off her finger and threw it at my forehead hard enough to leave a mark. The ring bounced across the tile floor while she calmly explained that I had only ever been a placeholder, someone safe and predictable while she figured out what she truly wanted. What she wanted, she said, was Wyatt, her childhood best friend who had moved back to town 6 months earlier. I picked up the ring, looked at it for a moment, then asked if she was actually serious. She said she was. According to her, she and Wyatt had been talking every day since he returned, and they shared a connection I could never understand. She called me boring, said I was nothing more than the safe option, and admitted she had settled for me because she thought stability was what she was supposed to want. The wedding coordinator quietly tried to leave, but Lauren stopped her and insisted she stay so she could hear there wouldn't be a wedding to coordinate anymore. I reminded Lauren that we had spent 4 years building a life together and asked if she was really telling me that, on the night before our wedding, I had only ever been a placeholder. She folded her arms and confidently said yes. She claimed Wyatt had always been the one she was meant to be with because first loves never truly die. Sitting in the corner was my African gray parrot, Giggsy, who had come with me because I had a vet appointment scheduled after the rehearsal. Giggsy let out a loud squawk, and Lauren pointed at him before saying that even the bird knew she didn't belong there. I corrected her on his name, but she brushed it off and admitted she hated him anyway. She said she was tired of our boring life, complained about my retirement plan and my bird, and insisted Wyatt offered excitement and passion instead. At that point, the wedding coordinator quietly excused herself and practically ran out of the room. Couldn't blame her. So that's it, I asked, still trying to understand how everything we had built together could disappear overnight. For years together, and you're walking away because your childhood crush came back? Lauren shook her head without a hint of doubt. He's not a crush, Jude. He's my soulmate. I never should have let him go. Choosing you was just the safe option, and I'm done pretending I ever wanted this life. I quietly slipped the engagement ring into my pocket and simply said, "All right." She looked genuinely surprised. "That's it? You're not going to fight for me? You're not going to beg me to stay?" I looked at her and asked, "What exactly do you want me to do? Compete with some fantasy you've convinced yourself is real? You already made your decision." Her face tightened with frustration. "I thought you'd care enough to fight for us." The strange part was that she actually sounded disappointed that I wasn't falling apart. I shook my head. "There is no us anymore. You ended that." I picked up Gigsy's cage and told her I was leaving. I suggested she stay with her mom since she clearly hated the life we had built together. That's when she said something that made absolutely no sense. Fine, but I'm taking Gigsy. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. You're not taking my bird. She insisted she deserved something because she had paid for half the apartment. I reminded her that she had just admitted she hated Gigsy and had spent years asking me to get rid of him. Her answer made it clear this wasn't about the bird at all. She said I was being a jerk, so she deserved to take something that mattered to me. I told her no. She immediately reached for the cage, and Gigsy exploded into a storm of screeching and flapping wings. I pulled the cage away just as he loudly squawked, "Give me that stupid bird!" Lauren lunged again, but I stepped aside. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Are you seriously out of your mind?" I asked. She fired back that it was her rehearsal dinner too and that I couldn't throw her out. "You canceled the wedding," I replied. "There's nothing left to rehearse. Leave." The shouting brought a security guard into the room. He looked around and asked if everything was okay. Before I could answer, Lauren pointed at me and said, "He's trying to steal my bird." The guard looked confused. Then Gigsy looked right at him and clearly said, "Bad lady." I explained that Gigsy had been my parrot for 6 years and that Lauren had just called off our wedding before trying to take him out of spite. The guard looked exhausted before he even got involved. He calmly told Lauren that if the bird wasn't hers, she needed to leave me alone because the whole situation was ridiculous. Lauren immediately claimed she was the victim. I couldn't help repeating her words back to her. "The victim? You called me a placeholder, threw an engagement ring at my head, canceled our wedding the night before, and now you're the victim because I won't let you steal my parrot." She accused me of making her look crazy, and the guard quietly muttered, "You're doing that yourself." Still refusing to let it go, Lauren made one last grab for the cage. This time Gigsy reached through the bars and bit her finger. It wasn't a serious bite, just enough to warn her to back off. She screamed as if she'd lost a hand and yelled that my demon bird had attacked her. I reminded her that she had been the one trying to grab him. The guard finally stepped between us and ordered her to leave. Lauren argued that she couldn't be kicked out because she had rented the venue. I corrected her and explained that the contract was under my name. Her face turned bright red with anger. As she grabbed her purse and headed for the door, she threw one last insult over her shoulder. She said I'd regret choosing a stupid bird over her, and that one day I'd be sitting alone in my boring apartment realizing what I'd lost. I simply answered, "Probably not." She slammed the door so hard the walls shook. The guard asked if I was okay. I thanked him for stepping in, and he wished me luck before leaving. I took Gigsy to his scheduled vet appointment, and for once he stayed unusually quiet during the drive home. When we got back, I opened his cage and he climbed onto my shoulder. I scratched his head and smiled. "You knew she was bad news all along, didn't you?" The next morning I woke up to 47 text messages and 23 missed calls. The wedding was supposed to begin at 3 that afternoon, but by 9 in the morning my phone was already exploding with messages from both our families. The wedding party, the caterer, the photographer, and just about everyone else asking what had happened. I sent one group message that read, "Wedding's off. Lauren canceled it during rehearsal last night. Sorry for the inconvenience. I'll take care of the cancellation costs." Then I switched my phone off, walked into the kitchen, and started making breakfast. Gigsy watched me from his perch with his head tilted as I cracked a couple of eggs. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked him. "Scrambled or fried?" Before I could finish, someone started pounding hard on the apartment door while shouting my name. A loud knock interrupted my breakfast. When I opened the apartment door, Lauren pushed right past me without asking and headed straight for the bedroom. "I need to get my stuff," she said. I asked what she was doing, and she casually told me she was moving in with Wyatt that very day and only needed her clothes. I told her to take her clothes and nothing else. There was no way I was letting her wander through the apartment unsupervised after everything that had happened. I followed her into the bedroom with Giggsy perched on my shoulder, making the annoyed clicking sounds he always made whenever she was around. Lauren started stuffing clothes into a duffel bag, but before long she reached for the iPad sitting on the nightstand. I stopped her immediately. "That's mine." She claimed we both used it, but I reminded her that I had bought it and the receipt had my name on it. She rolled her eyes, tossed it back on the bed, and moved to the dresser. A few seconds later, she picked up a jewelry box. I asked where she thought she was going with it. She insisted the earrings inside belonged to her, but I pointed out that while many of them had been gifts, the antique set from my grandmother had only been borrowed for special occasions. Those weren't hers to keep. She accused me of being petty, and I reminded her that less than 12 hours earlier she had canceled our wedding, called me a placeholder, and admitted she never loved me. I wasn't being petty. I was protecting my property. She reluctantly sorted through the jewelry, taking what was actually hers and leaving the rest behind. As she did, I noticed her eyes wandering around the room, stopping on my laptop, my headphones, and anything else she thought she might be able to claim. When she walked into the living room, her attention landed on the television. I shut that idea down immediately. She insisted we had bought it together, but I reminded her she had only contributed $50 while I had paid for the rest. If she wanted to argue, I had every receipt sitting in my filing cabinet. Giggsy bobbed his head as if he agreed with me, and Lauren snapped, "Shut up." I looked at her calmly and said, "Talk to my bird like that again, and you'll leave with nothing." She stood there glaring at me, silently scanning the apartment like she was taking inventory and trying to figure out what she could still walk away with. Finally, she threw up her hands. "You know what? Keep it all. Keep your boring apartment, your boring stuff, and your stupid bird. Wyatt already has a fully furnished place. I don't need any of this." "Great," I replied. "Then you can leave." She picked up her duffel bag and marched toward the front door, but stopped before walking out. "I do want one thing," she said. I asked what, even though I already knew. "The engagement ring. It's mine. I can sell it." I couldn't help laughing. She had thrown that ring at my face while telling me I was boring, and now she wanted it back because it had value. She claimed she had been emotional and wasn't thinking clearly, but I reminded her that she had been perfectly clear when she told me I was just a placeholder and that she never loved me. The ring was staying with me. She argued that I didn't have the right to keep it because the engagement was over, but I shrugged and told her maybe I'd sell it, or maybe I'd melt it down and make a nameplate for Giggsy's cage. Either way, it wasn't her concern anymore. She looked like she wanted to keep arguing, but even she seemed to realize how ridiculous she sounded. "Fine," she snapped. "Keep your stupid ring. Keep everything. You'll die alone anyway." Then she slammed the door behind her. I listened as her footsteps echoed down the hallway before the building's front door finally closed. I looked around the apartment and realized everything was exactly where it belonged. The only thing missing was the person who had spent the morning trying to take as much as she could on her way out. About an hour later, my best friend Josh showed up carrying sandwiches and a case of energy drinks. The first thing he asked was, "What the heck happened?" I told him everything, from the rehearsal dinner disaster to Lauren trying to clean out my apartment the next morning. Josh listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons we've been friends for so long. When I finished, he leaned back and shook his head in disbelief. "She tried to take Giggsy?" I nodded. "After telling you she never loved you and calling you boring?" Another nod. "Then she tried to walk out with your stuff?" I told him that was the part one still couldn't wrap my head around. She had left me at the altar and then acted like she was entitled to half my belongings the next day. I had to watch her every move just to make sure she didn't leave with my laptop or anything else. Josh grabbed a sandwich and laughed in disbelief. "You dodged a massive bullet. You were only hours away from marrying her." He was right. We spent the rest of the day watching movies, eating junk food, and ignoring the non-stop flood of messages on my phone from people who all seemed to have an opinion about what had happened. Most of them weren't worth reading, but one message immediately caught my attention. One message stood out from all the noise. It was from Evie, one of Lauren's bridesmaids. She wrote, "Hey Jude, I heard what happened. That's really messed up. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. I showed the message to Josh. He immediately remembered her as the blonde nurse who worked at the hospital and said he wasn't surprised she had reached out instead of blindly taking Lauren's side. I thanked her with a short text but didn't say much more because I was still trying to get through each day without falling apart. The following week was a mess. I had to cancel the honeymoon, return wedding gifts, contact vendors, and untangle everything that came with a wedding that never happened. Around the same time, my mom told me Lauren had already moved in with Wyatt. Apparently, she'd gone straight from calling off our wedding to playing house with him like the last 4 years of our relationship had never existed. I tried not to dwell on it and focused on work instead. I'm an aerospace engineer at a defense contractor, which sounds more exciting than it really is. Most of my job involves designing ventilation systems for aircraft, but I enjoy solving technical problems, and the steady work helped keep my mind occupied. About 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, my supervisor called me into his office and offered me the lead design role on a new transport helicopter project. It came with more responsibility, more trust, and a promotion. The timing couldn't have been stranger. The same week, my personal life completely fell apart. My career took a major step forward. I accepted the opportunity without hesitation and buried myself in work. I stayed late, came in early, and volunteered for extra assignments because staying busy was easier than thinking about Lauren and Wyatt. About a month after everything happened, Evie reached out again. This time she asked if I'd like to grab coffee, adding that there was no pressure and she just thought it might help to talk with someone who understood how strange the whole situation had been. I thought about it for a day before saying yes. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and she was already there waiting with 2 cups on the table. She smiled and said she wasn't sure how I took my coffee, so she'd ordered black and left room for cream or sugar if I wanted it. Black was exactly how I drank it. After a brief, slightly awkward silence, she apologized for what Lauren had done and admitted that almost everyone in the wedding party had been completely blindsided. Lauren had kept her relationship with Wyatt a secret from nearly everyone. The only person who knew was her cousin, who, according to Evie, had actually encouraged the whole thing. She kept telling Lauren that she deserved passion and excitement and that choosing stability meant settling for less. I joked that her cousin sounded like a wonderful influence, and Evie laughed before agreeing that she was a disaster who constantly created drama but somehow always convinced Lauren to listen to her. I asked if they were still friends, and she shook her head. She told me she'd called Lauren out for ending the relationship the night before the wedding and had been told she simply didn't understand true love. They hadn't spoken since. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours. Conversation came surprisingly easily. Evie had a dry sense of humor that I really liked, and working as a nurse at a children's hospital had given her a calm, practical outlook on life. She didn't waste energy on unnecessary drama because she dealt with real problems every day. When we left the cafe, she asked if I'd like to do it again sometime, and I realized I actually would. One coffee turned into regular lunches, then dinners, and before long we were spending time together every week. Nothing felt forced. There were no expectations, no pressure, and no awkward attempts to replace what I'd lost. We were simply 2 people who had both been caught in Lauren's chaos and were figuring out life one step at a time. Giggsy made his opinion of her clear the first time she came over. Instead of avoiding her like he had with Lauren, he climbed right onto her shoulder and started gently playing with her hair. I laughed and told her that was a rare honor because he didn't warm up to people easily. We kept things casual for months. She understood I needed time, and I appreciated that she never tried to rush anything. Meanwhile, work kept getting better. My promotion became official. I was leading the helicopter project. And for the first time in years, I felt respected as more than just another engineer sitting behind a computer. Evie and I settled into a comfortable routine. She stayed over on weekends, I helped her study for her master's program, and we'd even take Giggsy to the park together. It was a simple, peaceful relationship without the constant tension I'd always ignored with Lauren. Exactly 1 year after the wedding that never happened, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, and the voice on the other end introduced herself as Lauren's mother. I almost ended the call immediately, but instead I asked what she wanted. She sighed and quietly said she needed to talk to me because her daughter wasn't doing well. When I simply replied, "Okay," she sounded surprised by my lack of emotion before admitting that things with Wyatt weren't working out at all. Mrs. Henderson let out a long sigh before telling me that Wyatt wasn't the man Lauren believed he was. She said Lauren already had a baby boy, was 8 months pregnant with another child, and was completely overwhelmed. Wyatt was barely home, she explained, and Lauren was exhausted, scared, and finally realizing she had made the biggest mistake of her life by leaving me. I simply said, "That's unfortunate." She sounded frustrated by my response and reminded me that her daughter was about to have 2 children in less than 2 years. I asked why she was calling me because none of that had anything to do with me anymore. She said it was because I had always treated Lauren well. I had been dependable, stable, and reliable, and now Lauren was paying the price for throwing that away to chase a fantasy. I calmly told her that Lauren's choices were no longer my responsibility. Mrs. Henderson seemed shocked that I wasn't more sympathetic. She insisted Lauren had simply made a mistake. I corrected her. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate decision, and now she was living with the consequences. She asked if I could really move on after spending 4 years together, and I told her I already had. After a long silence, she quietly mentioned that Lauren had heard I was seeing Evie, one of her former bridesmaids, and that it had upset her. I told her that wasn't my problem either. She said Lauren needed someone who understood her, but I pointed out that she should be asking Wyatt or the cousin who had encouraged her to destroy our relationship, not me. Mrs. Henderson asked one last time if I could help Lauren. I asked what she honestly expected me to do. Was I supposed to fix the relationship with the man she left me for or solve the problems created by having 2 children with someone she barely knew? Her voice softened as she admitted Lauren often talked about me now. She said Lauren believed I would have been a wonderful father and wished she had appreciated what she had before throwing it away. I simply replied, "She can think that if she wants, but it doesn't change anything." Before she could continue, I ended the call. Life kept moving forward. Evie and I continued building our relationship without rushing anything. There was no pressure, no drama, and no expectations beyond enjoying each other's company. Around 1.5 years into our relationship, I found myself casually looking at engagement rings during breaks at work. 2 years after the wedding that never happened, I proposed to her at the same park where we'd had our first real conversation after that first coffee together. It wasn't an elaborate proposal. It was just me, Evie, and Giggsy enjoying a quiet afternoon. I got down on one knee, asked her to marry me, and she smiled before saying yes. We set our wedding date for the fall, the same season my first wedding had been planned, but this time everything felt different. There were no doubts, no ignored warning signs, and no feeling that I was forcing something to work. We simply fit together. About 6 months before the wedding, my phone rang again from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and Lauren's voice came through the speaker. I almost hung up without saying a word, but she quickly begged me to stay on the line because she needed to talk. She told me Wyatt was gone, that he had cheated on her several times with her own cousin, and that everything had fallen apart. I answered with a simple, "Okay." She sounded crushed that I didn't react the way she expected. Through tears, she admitted she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She said she should never have left me because I had always been kind, dependable, and genuinely loved her. Now she was raising 2 little boys alone while Wyatt wanted nothing to do with being a father. She said he only wanted the fun parts of life and disappeared when responsibility showed up. She confessed that she constantly imagined how different her life would have been if she had married me instead. I reminded her that her situation wasn't my problem anymore. She agreed it wasn't but kept apologizing, saying she had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to her for a fantasy that became a nightmare. That's when I quietly told her I was engaged. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before she finally asked who I was marrying. When I answered, "Evie," she almost whispered, "My bridesmaid." I confirmed it, and she immediately insisted I couldn't marry her. She claimed Evie wasn't right for me, that she knew me better than anyone, and that I was only doing it to hurt her. I told her she was wrong. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was simply living my life. Lauren refused to accept that. She said we were always supposed to end up together and claimed her relationship with Wyatt had only been a phase before we eventually found our way back to each other. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded her that we hadn't taken a break. She had left me at the altar. Through tears, she apologized again and said she had been scared and confused when she made that decision. Lauren kept crying as she tried to explain herself. She said her cousin had convinced her that she deserved more excitement and passion, but now she realized how wrong that advice had been. She admitted that I had always been enough and that she had thrown away the best thing she ever had. I listened for a moment before simply saying, "Okay." She sounded frustrated by my reaction and asked what she had to say to make things right. I told her there was nothing left to say. She begged me to forgive her, to give us another chance, and even asked me to call off my wedding so we could start over. I told her that wasn't going to happen. Through tears, she pleaded with me, saying she was a single mother with 2 little boys. Wyatt wanted nothing to do with them anymore. Her cousin had abandoned her, and she had no one left. She insisted she needed me. I calmly told her she didn't need me. She needed help, but I wasn't the person who could give it to her. Then she said she loved me. I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. "No, you don't," I replied. She insisted she always had, but I told her she had never loved me. She loved what I represented. I was security, stability, and a backup plan she expected would always be waiting. That wasn't love. She tried to argue, but I ended the conversation by wishing her the best and hanging up. Evie looked up from the textbook she had been studying and asked who had called. I simply smiled and said, "Nobody." 6 months later, our wedding day finally arrived. The ceremony was set for 3 o'clock, and by 2:45 I was standing at the altar with Josh beside me as my best man, waiting for Evie to walk down the aisle. The string quartet began playing. The guests stood up, and then a loud voice suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. Lauren came rushing through the doors carrying one child on her hip while another clung to her leg. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, messy hair tied into a loose bun, and clothes that looked like she had thrown them on without a second thought. The music stopped instantly, and the room fell into complete silence. She marched straight down the aisle, ignoring the shocked faces around her, and yelled, "Jude, don't do this. You're making a mistake." I didn't move. I simply watched her walk toward me with Wyatt's children while nearly 100 guests stared in disbelief. When she reached the front, I looked at her and calmly said, "Lauren, leave." She burst into tears and refused. Mascara was running down her face as she begged me not to marry Evie because we were supposed to be together. Somewhere in the crowd, I heard an elderly woman gasp, and I noticed Evie's father standing up, ready to intervene if necessary. I told Lauren we weren't together anymore. She insisted that leaving me had been the biggest mistake of her life and begged me to let her fix it. Josh leaned over and quietly whispered, "Is she actually serious?" I whispered back, "Apparently." Lauren continued pleading, saying I should leave Evie and come with her because we could still become a family. She pointed at her 2 boys and said they needed a father, reminding me that I had always been dependable and stable. I cut her off immediately. Wyatt is their father, not me. She admitted that was true but insisted I could be a better father than he ever was. She wanted me to raise another man's children and pretend none of the last 2 years had happened. The wedding coordinator looked completely frozen while security finally started hurrying down the aisle. I raised my voice so everyone in the room could hear. "So let me understand this. You want me to walk away from my own wedding, leave my bride standing here, and become the stepfather to the children you had with the man you left me for?" Without hesitation, she answered yes. She claimed we were soulmates and that first loves always found their way back together. I couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of it. I reminded her that she was the one who called me a placeholder, threw an engagement ring at my head, told me she never loved me, and moved in with Wyatt the very next day. Yet somehow she was acting as though I had ruined everything. She cried harder and blamed fear and confusion, insisting she never meant any of it. I told her she had meant every single word. By now both children were crying too, frightened by the scene unfolding around them. Lauren begged me again to leave Evie and start over with her, insisting everything could still be the way it was supposed to be. 2 security guards finally reached her and politely told her she had to leave. She refused and pulled away so suddenly she nearly dropped the toddler she was carrying. Still crying, she shouted that I was supposed to have waited for her, that Wyatt had only been temporary, and that she had always planned to come back because that's how it was meant to happen. I stared at her in disbelief and told her that wasn't how real life worked. She screamed that true love always found its way back, that we were destined to be together, and begged me one last time to leave Evie and choose her instead. Even as one of the boys tugged at her hair and both children cried in confusion, she kept repeating that they needed me and that she needed me too. Lauren kept crying as security slowly guided her toward the exit. She shouted that I needed her even if I was too stubborn to admit it, that we were meant to be together, and begged me not to throw away what we had. I looked at her and answered as calmly as I could. We don't have anything. You made sure of that 2 years ago. She fought against the guards as they escorted her out, screaming that I would regret this for the rest of my life. She insisted Evie could never love me the way she did and kept repeating that we were soulmates who belonged together. Her voice echoed through the venue until the doors finally closed behind her. The room fell completely silent. Some guests looked horrified while others looked like they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Josh stood beside me trying his hardest not to laugh. I turned to the wedding coordinator and suggested we take a 5-minute break before restarting from Evie's entrance. She nodded, still stunned by the chaos. Then I turned to Josh and quietly told him to find the venue manager and call my lawyer because I wanted the paperwork for a restraining order started immediately. About 20 minutes later, the ceremony began again. This time Evie walked down the aisle without interruption. When she reached me, she smiled and whispered, "Your ex is completely unhinged." I smiled back and whispered, "That's why I'm filing a restraining order first thing Monday morning." She grinned and replied, "Good, because if she shows up at the reception, I'm dealing with her myself." I couldn't help laughing. The officiant cleared his throat. Everyone settled back into their seats, and we finally got married. After everything that had happened, the rest of the day went surprisingly well. The reception was exactly what we had hoped for, filled with good food, dancing, laughter, and people who genuinely wanted to celebrate with us. Looking back, having an ex crash your wedding and beg you to leave your bride definitely makes for a memorable story. On Monday, I followed through with the restraining order, and Lauren was legally prohibited from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of me. After that, life moved forward. I earned another promotion at work, Evie and I bought a house together, and Giggsy got an entire room to himself with a huge cage, climbing trees, and plenty of space to roam. It was the same quiet, stable life Lauren once called boring, but it was exactly the life I wanted. About 3 months after the wedding, Josh told me that Wyatt had been arrested on multiple charges, including domestic violence, assaulting Lauren, and child endangerment. Police had found bruises on both Lauren and one of the little boys. I didn't celebrate or feel any satisfaction. I simply heard the news and kept living my life. 6 months later, I learned Wyatt had accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 8 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 5. By then, Lauren was living in her mother's basement with 2 children under the age of 3. She had no job, no savings, and Wyatt had emptied their joint bank account before he was arrested. The cousin who had encouraged her to leave me and later had an affair with Wyatt wanted nothing to do with her anymore. Most of Lauren's friends had disappeared as well. The exciting, passionate life she had chased ended with heartbreak, abuse, and a prison sentence for the man she chose over me. I heard through mutual friends that she tried reaching out a few times, asking for money and claiming I somehow owed her because she had wasted her best years. My lawyer handled those attempts by sending cease and desist letters, and eventually the messages stopped. About a year after our wedding, Evie, and I were having dinner when I noticed Lauren sitting across the restaurant with a man who looked at least 20 years older than she was. She looked exhausted, worn down, and nothing like the confident woman who had once walked away from me. She noticed me too. I saw her start to stand as if she wanted to come over, but I turned back to Evie and continued our conversation without acknowledging her. A few minutes later, I looked up again and Lauren was gone, leaving her date sitting there by himself. That was the last time I saw her. There were no dramatic final conversations or emotional reunions. She lived with the consequences of the choices she made, and I lived the life I had built for myself. She walked away because she thought I was too boring, too stable, and not exciting enough. The man she chose ended up abusing her and spending years behind bars. She was left raising 2 children alone while living in her mother's basement. As for me, I married the right woman, advanced in my career, bought a home, and gave Giggsy a room of his own. I never had to seek revenge because life handled that part on its own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's moving on, finding happiness, and living a life so good that the past no longer matters. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to subscribe. We're getting close to our next big milestone, and your support truly means a lot.